it's very little produced from Iran itself, right? Very little. There are a couple of people on the ground. Most of it is everybody who's interested in Iran, either directly because of connections or abstractly because of world politics and their love of it, talking their impressions about it. The amount of misinformation going on in that space is painful. And we don't really have the people to come and help sort through it. There are a couple people on Twitter trying. But I mean, a good example is change your city to Tehran. Right? Does that make an ounce of difference? If you talk to people in Iran, they're like, no, this is ridiculous and dumb. Is it a moment of support? Definitely. Just like greenifying your profiles is a thing of support. But we're also in a weird position because we're only seeing one point of view, right? If you read Twitter on the Iranian election, you'd be absolutely convinced that the entire country voted for the opposition. You'd be absolutely convinced the opposition dominated Iran. We know that's not true. In the same way, we see that similar dynamic because of networks, in other environments. In my country, people were absolutely convinced that Obama would just take 90% of the vote, right? And while he took more than even I was expecting, there's so little understanding of people who think differently than you because of these connections. And this kind of media typically magnifies one view or the other, either because only one view is produced in the media, in the social media, or because the opposing views don't see one another. And I think that's where I get very worried about it, and where I get worried about, the future of journalism, because journalists have their faults, but most are really invested in trying to tell both sides of the story, trying to put out information that explains the broader narrative. And when we rely on things that are extremely tilted, we start to get mob-like mentality and beliefs that are actually pretty dangerous to futures of diplomacy, futures of democracy. And so I get concerned about that. When I look at Iran, do I like the current government? No. Do I actually like the opposition government? No. I think they're equally scary. The whole thing about the opposition, it was a notion of change. Do I think that this dynamic has been really dangerous to the future of diplomacy? Yes. I think it's going to be very difficult I think it's created a whole new set of divides around the Middle East in ways that we don't really need right now. Increased hatred, increased misunderstanding is not actually helping. And so it's rallied so many people from the West to be even more hateful towards Iran rather than understanding the majority of Iranian people and the different complexities of their politics, which are just as messy as most of ours. And most of us in most of our countries don't like our leaders, half the time we think they're complete idiots. The same is true in Iran. The majority of people don't like any of the governments, but they're voting and they're trying to see change, they're hoping something will happen. But they're like us, and unfortunately, that has gotten lost in a lot of this, and that's what scares me in seeing this kind of stuff happen.
We often talk about social network sites and social networking sites in the same manner. Can you explain us what is the difference?
Sure. Social networking, forget the sites, just social networking, is the practice of making connections for all sorts of utility purposes, right? Going out of your way to network, going out of your way to go to an event and meet new people and really go through this process of building your network. And we can think about different technologies online that help us network, help us meet new people. Online dating sites are a classic example of it, right? Business networking sites, also there. When this whole set of social media tools came out, although it goes back to 6 Degrees, we really think of it in terms of Friendster and MySpace and Facebook and the various incarnations around the globe. These sites were originally designed Friendster in particular was originally designed for networking. It was originally designed to help people meet each other and get laid. In practice, what it became was a space where people publicly articulated their social network. and used that social network to hang out, to socialize. It became the frame around those sites. So the reason to think about them as social network sites is to get away from the practice as the primary mode of the sites and think about what makes them specifically unique. And that uniqueness has to do with the articulation of the network. And that's what differentiates, a site like Friendster from, Match.com. It's what differentiates a site like Facebook from, all sorts of community sites. So there's other sites that allow you to socialize, that are community organized, but this collection of sites is about the social network. Are some of them also enabling social networking? Sure, of course. But when we use that term, we start to mean a whole variety of other things that's not really about making a mark or a definition of that particular scope of things. It also tends to project a practice onto people who don't necessarily engage in that practice. And so the reason that I got pretty adamant about talking about them as social network sites is that teenagers aren't networking. And so many of the fears come from the ideas that teenagers are networking, when they're not. They're just socializing with their friends.
Now you are studying social nuggets, I see in the corner of my. Okay. Can you talk about it?
Sure. The reason I've been thinking about social nuggets is that nugget meaning like a little bit of information that I can just give to you, little bits of social information. And for a long time, the social media tools have been about producing this sort of large, set of content, right? Whether it's like a blog post, poof, right? A long response on a mailing list, poof, right? And you get these wars of large content back and forth. And what I think is really interesting is that what happens when you have a constraint? You have 140 characters. What can you shove into 140 characters? That is inevitably a nugget. And it's inevitably a little bit that I'm going to share with you. And what we're seeing is not just a transition of what you can produce and how you can, alter the text to get down to 140 characters, but also the ways in which you try to consume it. That you share these social nuggets, and in return you get this large quantity of social nuggets on your Facebook stream, on your Twitter stream, whatever you're starting to see that people use of these things. And you don't consume them as though I have to read each thing and go to the next. You scan it. You get a sense of it. You're really thinking about this friend group today. You look at it and you look at their posts. Something pops out at you and you get a sense of it. And we've got this whole set of peripheral awareness as part of the culture. So the reason I'm thinking about the social nuggets is that what happens when we just toss all these little bits out, and when we're given all of these little bits, and we're like, how do I work through it? And I think there's something interesting about that change, and I think that there's something really powerful about the fact that constraint is critical to it. Because even if Twitter didn't have 140 character constraint, I can guarantee you people would go back to being really verbose. Heck, they do it anyhow. They post, 100 things a day or 100 things an hour, and you're like, do you have to talk that much? Go away, get out of my stream. Right? So I think that and we're also reaching a balancing issue, where when you choose who to put in your stream, you think about what they'll contribute to it, not just in terms of content, but how much space they take up. And I'm amazed when I talk to people of how frequently people delete somebody from Twitter. It's a lot harder with Facebook, but from Twitter, just because they talk too much. You talk too much, I can't deal with you. And they come back to them later, even their closest friends. I was talking with a woman, she deleted her college roommate, who she still considered one of her best friends, because he talked too much. He was just too annoying. And she's like, I hear from him enough anyhow. And I think there's something interesting about that dynamic. Facebook is messier because you can do sorts of manual categorization of groups and who you're going to follow and stuff. But it's still quite overwhelming. You can't really delete people. The social protocol to it is very different than on Twitter. And so it's a lot harder. You can't really just ignore. I kind of want an ignore button. So it's a different set of dynamics, but part of it is looking at those affordances around the social nuggets and seeing how that's moving us forward.
I remember Dallas Nuggets for the